Hello, welcome to Mabou, where culture lives, as the sign says, which makes a lot of sense given the reading that we're talking about, which is Jodi McDavid's The Fiddle Burning Priest of Mabou. You see the sign? I'll take another picture of it and superimpose it here. You see the fiddle on the side, the fiddlehead, as emblematic of the town. And that says something about Mabou as a place. Mabou is on the west coast of the island. It's just north of Judic. It's further south of Cheticamp, and it is one of the main focal points or symbolic focal points of Cape Breton music. The Rankins are from here. The sign proudly says that as you come into town, and the Red Shoe Pub is just up the street. That's owned by one of the Junior Rankins. That's owned by one of the Rankins, and is an important point during Celtic Colours Festival. What you have here is an example of a story of a priest who came and took the fiddles. What exactly he did afterwards is up for debate. What the fiddlers reacted to is up to debate. This is a legend. This is a legend, which means, for those who aren't familiar with legends, oversimplifying, but it'll get my point across, are stories that are told that typically they are told as if they are actually true, but what they are really, more to the point, they are told because they tend to push against the received wisdom. We think about supernatural legends, where science tells us one thing about, the existence or the non-existence of the paranormal. Religion tells us a different thing, but specifically having to do with such things like, where spirits reside, and that they do not reside here, they go off to peace. But then we have these stories of buildings being haunted, or places being somehow sites where the dead and the undead seem to be present, and so those are they're often told in private. They're because they push against official culture. Legends are typically intimate narratives. Now, the story might take on such weight after a while that it's no longer private pushing back against received wisdom. It does become the received wisdom. And such is the case with the Fiddle Burning Priest of Mabou legend. So you have this nugget, this little kernel, where a priest came and he gathered the fiddles. Then you have these variations. Did he hoard them? Did he burn them? Did he destroy them in some kind of other way? Smash them to pieces? What? Those vary according to version. You also have the fiddler's reaction. Do we not know? Is the fiddler just not really an active character in this narrative? Did they give up the fiddles? Did they give up a fiddle, but keep their good one? Like have an old crappy fiddle. It's like, I take this one. And what precisely happened? And you always have this coda, this implied coda, in that nevertheless, he was not successful in destroying fiddle music. And by virtue of not destroying fiddle music, he was not successful in destroying Celtic culture, where culture lives. And I think that's the essence of it. Now, as always, when we're talking about something that is purported to have happened and that is being told as true, it makes sense to see if we can figure that out. And we have the actual priest, Kenneth Joseph MacDonald, genuine priest. Was in Mabou for a number of years in this same critical period. Even in his obituary notice, in the pamphlet that was published upon his death with a long essay of reminiscing about his life, it was indicated that he hated picnics. He was opposed to them, opposed to dancing, opposed to, and again, having to do not so much with music, but with the alcoholism the drinking that often accompanied it, and the idea that it was a prelude to un-Catholic, un-Christian behavior. So even though other priests eventually around here would host picnics, and there are local priests who are held up as heroes and champions of Cape Breton culture, he is not one of them. Now, over time, his name often disappears. It could just be told as, there was this priest. There's no indication in the historical record that he actually did this thing. But it seems to be a symptom of something. Symptom of an authoritarian who is trying to quash the very local rich culture. And what is more so, I cannot emphasize this enough, the importance of the coda, whether that coda is implied or not, the importance of the idea that the tradition continued. So you have this long association of fiddles and devils and dance music. You have the devil went down to Georgia. You have Nero fiddling while Rome burned, and Nero's association with the Antichrist and certain interpretations of Revelation. So it's not a bad. It's the connection between fiddles as representative of evil and the priest as representative of good is already in place, although it's an interesting thing to try and unpack. And you also have a cultural ambiguity, even in pro-fiddling cultures like Cape Breton. The fiddler has this ambiguous role, ambiguous spot. Marie Thompson, in her article on the Vanishing Cape Breton Fiddler, the documentary from the early 1970s, which helped spur the Cape Breton fiddle revival, she quotes someone by saying, there was a barn there flat on the ground, and the house was ready too. It was old and had an awful lean to it, but there was people living in it. There was clothes on the line. And Neil said to my father, there must be a good fiddler live there, Dan. He said, everything was falling down. So you have the fiddler as this marginal character who was associated with potential alcoholism, who was associated with being less concerned with work and more concerned with play. So integral, required for the proper cultural customs of dance, and dance and music and frivolity and communitas, but also a little bit problematic. But then you also had, you had John Allen Cameron, who the quote Jodi McDavid talks about, quotes him at the very beginning of the article, that the two most important people in the community were the priest and the fiddler, which says something. There's a nice little binary that's there. Is it sort of a sacred and profane? Is it a order and disorder? What are the two sort of, if not binaries, at least complementarities that the two characters represent? Now, the priest in folklore is an interesting character to begin with, because often, people are pious. People, not all people obviously, but piety is often a value, and being demonstrably part of a religious faith, particularly a faith because it is the conduit to the divine, which people often believe in, is often a good character. The priest is there to officiate at rites of passage. The priest is there sometimes as a help, in fairy tale terms, as a helper or a donor, someone who can provide and give succor or give assistance to the hero. And there are many positive legends about priests as well. Supernatural legends, priests who are able to fight off devils, priests who travel through the night in order to give last rites, all sorts of positive aspects. And so one of the large points of McDavid's work has to do with what she calls counter-clericalism. Anti-clericalism is a term that's used to explain the uprising against the institutional orders of particularly the Roman Catholic Church, although basically any church that has a fairly developed hierarchical system and it's intertwined with political power. So the Anglican Church works as well. So the French Revolution is often described in terms of anti-clericalism. Counter-clericalism, in her terms, has to do with the idea that, people are not necessarily rejecting faith, and fundamentally they wouldn't want to be understood as rejecting faith. They imagine themselves and understand themselves to be faithful adherents and pious people, But that doesn't mean that they cannot critique, often in quiet forms, like joke, like legend, these same forms that aren't pronounced in public, but are pushing against the received wisdom. They can nevertheless critique priests. So priests become the object of gossip and rumor and joke and legend like this. And there's a whole theme that runs throughout Atlantic Canadian folklore, but I think folklore in general, where the priest can hold this position, and it is seen as someone who is abusing or ignorant of or overly prideful of the authority that they have, without necessarily trying to undermine the fact that that authority is the provision of something that is of a fundamental good. So it's not rejection of faith, it's a rejection of what they see as abuses of faith, minor abuses of faith. It also does lay the bedrock for the potential outburst of actual anti-clericalism, where there's finally this mode where these petty abuses of power are pale in comparison to the genuine abuses of power in terms of things like Mount Cashel Orphanage and other sort of abuses that the church has done. But we can talk about that at a different time. So anyway, so Mabou, where culture lives, you have this idea of culture could have died, and is that persistence, that perseverance. Our university's logo or motto, when translated into English from the Gaelic, of course, is perseverance will triumph. And so when you have a culture like Cape Breton Celticism, this sort of diasporic culture that doesn't understand itself simply in terms of immigrant culture, but refugee culture, the thread of perseverance, despite efforts by the people who ought to be preserving and helping us preserve. The idea that despite that, something survived is an integral thing to understand. And so Jodi McDavid's Fiddle Burning Priest of Mabou is a great example of legend, and it speaks to something within the Cape Breton culture and the Cape Breton character, particularly of the Scots ancestry. All right, be well.